He signed the papers without looking at her once. That was the part Elara Whitmore would never forget. Not the cold marble conference table, not the lawyers in their pressed suits, shuffling documents like she was a property transfer, not even the words Damien Voss finally said when the last signature was done. It was the fact that he never looked at her. 10 years. 3,650 days of a life built inside his shadow. And he couldn't give her 30 seconds of eye contact at the end of it. His mother, Helena Voss, sat at the far end of the table with her hands folded and her chin lifted and a small, satisfied pull at the corner of her mouth that she didn't bother to hide. She had wanted this for years. Everyone in that room knew it. Even Damien's attorney looked slightly embarrassed. Elara picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. She signed her name in the same steady cursive her grandmother had taught her at a kitchen table in another life entirely, and she set the pen down, and she stood up, and she walked out. Nobody stopped her. Nobody said a word. If you've ever been in a room where people made you feel like you were nothing, if you've ever smiled through something that was tearing you in half, then you already know exactly how that walk felt. What would you have done? Before we go further, if this story is already pulling at something in you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because what happens in the next 2 hours will change everything you thought you knew about power, love, and the woman nobody saw coming. The divorce had been Damien's idea, and like most of Damien's ideas in the last 2 years, it had originated not inside his own head, but inside the elegant, pressure-sealed mind of his mother. Helena Voss was 71 years old and had the posture of a woman who had never once apologized for anything. She had built the Voss family reputation brick by brick over 4 decades, had cultivated the right friendships, attended the right events, positioned the right sons in front of the right cameras. And she had watched with barely concealed displeasure for 10 full years as her eldest son remained married to a woman who had no name, no lineage, and no visible ambition beyond keeping a quiet apartment and reading books that Helena considered unsuitable for a woman of implied station. She has no presence, Helena had said, more than once. She contributes nothing. She embarrasses us by being unremarkable. What Helena never understood, what Damien himself failed to understand until it was far too late, was that Elara Whitmore was the most deliberate person in any room she ever entered. Every choice she made was considered. Every word she withheld was chosen. The quiet was not absence. It was architecture. But that understanding would come later, and it would come at a cost that neither of them was prepared to pay. Elara had met Damien Voss at a museum fundraiser 11 years ago, which was itself a mild irony because she had not been there as a guest. She had been there as part of the oversight committee for a privately funded restoration project. Though she had given a false name to the event coordinator and worn a dress she'd bought secondhand from a consignment shop on purpose. It was something she did in those years, slipping into rooms as something smaller than she was, watching how people behaved when they didn't know who they were talking to. Damien had found her standing in front of a painting that everyone else at the party had been ignoring. A mid-century oil piece, a woman alone at a harbor, facing out toward the water. He had stopped beside her, holding 2 glasses of wine, and said, "You're the only person here who's actually looked at this thing." She had glanced at him sideways. "Everyone else is networking." "So are you, theoretically." "No," she said, "I'm not." He handed her one of the glasses without asking if she wanted it. She took it. They stood in front of the painting in silence for a while, and she noticed that he wasn't performing anything, wasn't posturing or scanning the room over her shoulder for someone more useful to talk to. He was just standing there, looking at a painting he clearly didn't have a strong opinion about, and something about that ordinariness in him made her curious. She didn't tell him her name that night, not her real one. She told him she was called Elara, which was true, and that she worked in the arts sector, which was partially true, and that she had grown up somewhere coastal, which was also true, and she left it there. He didn't press. He seemed to find the vagueness interesting rather than suspicious. When he asked for her number at the end of the evening, she gave it to him. She told herself it was curiosity, that she would see who he was without the weight of her name between them, that she would give it a few weeks, maybe a month, and then either tell him the truth or walk away. That was 11 years ago. Well, the reason she stayed was also the reason the divorce broke something in her that she hadn't fully expected. Because Damien Voss, in the years before his mother fully reclaimed him, had been genuinely good. Not perfect. She was never confused about that. He was impatient, sometimes arrogant, had a tendency to solve problems with money in ways that made real intimacy harder than it needed to be. He kept emotional distance as a default setting and called it composure. He had trouble saying the obvious thing when the obvious thing was tender. But he had also sat beside her in a hospital waiting room for 14 hours once, when a woman who worked in their building had been in an accident and had no family nearby, and Alara had felt she should stay. Damien had stayed too. He hadn't made a production of it. He just stayed. He had learned how she took her coffee. He had driven 4 hours on a Tuesday once because she'd mentioned, only once, that she missed the smell of the ocean. He had never once asked her about her background, her family, her finances. And she'd understood over time that this was partly because he didn't consider those things relevant to who she was, which was, without question, the most unexpectedly decent thing about him. She had loved him for those things, the specific, small, real things. What she had not understood until too late was how completely Helena Voss could erode a person's center over time the way water erodes stone, not with force, but with patience and repetition and the slow replacement of one set of values with another. The erosion had become visible about 3 years ago. Damien had started arriving home later and saying less. He had started attending events without her, family dinners, board meetings, the kind of social occasions that were really about positioning. And when she asked, he said Helena had suggested a lower profile for her, at least for now, something about optics and a pending acquisition. Alara had nodded and said that was fine. 2 years ago, he had stopped asking her opinion about anything related to the company. She noticed. She said nothing. 18 months ago, Helena had invited her to lunch, alone, just the two of them, which had never happened before. They had sat in Helena's dining room with its cathedral ceilings and its portrait of the Voss patriarch, looking down at them like a judgment, and Helena had said, over poached salmon, that she hoped Alara was thinking seriously about her future. "My future is fine," Alara had said pleasantly. "The family is entering a critical period," Helena said. "Damien needs a partner who brings tangible assets to the table, someone with connections in sectors we're moving into. I'm sure you understand." "I understand what you're saying," Alara said. "I'm glad." "I didn't say I agreed with it." Helena's expression had gone perfectly smooth in the way of a woman who had won every argument she'd ever decided to have. "Of course. I just wanted to make sure we understood each other." Alara had driven home alone that afternoon and sat in the kitchen for a while without turning on any lights. She had known then, not suspected, known, what was coming. She had given herself time to decide what to do about it. What she decided was, nothing yet. Wait, watch. Let it happen, because sometimes the only way to see a person's full character is to let them show you who they become under pressure. Damien showed her 6 months later, when he came home one evening and told her, standing in the kitchen doorway with his jacket still on and his keys still in his hand, that he wanted a divorce. He gave her 3 reasons. They were all Helena's reasons, delivered in Helena's language, wearing Damien's voice like a borrowed coat. Alara listened to all 3. Then she said, "All right." He had looked startled, as though he'd prepared for a fight and didn't know what to do without one. "I need 2 weeks," she said. "Of course," he said, visibly relieved, and she felt something inside her go very quiet and very cold. Not grief exactly, or not only grief, but the particular sensation of a person who has just confirmed something they already knew and cannot pretend otherwise any longer. She spent those 2 weeks making phone calls. Not to lawyers, though she spoke to those too. The first calls she made were to a private number she had not dialed in years, a number she kept in her memory rather than any device, routed through a relay system that would have bewildered anyone who tried to trace it. The voice that answered was unhurried and careful, and exactly as she remembered. "I was wondering," Lucian Moretti said, "when you'd call." "I need the ship at the harbor," she said. 2 weeks from Thursday." A pause. "That's a statement, not a request." "It's a request," she said. "I'm asking." Another pause, slightly longer. "The Whitmore girl asking for something," he said, and she could hear the shift in his voice, not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to it, the sound of a person who has waited a long time for a particular conversation and is choosing his words with care. "That's new." Don't make it sentimental, she said. I wouldn't dream of it. Thursday the 14th. Yes. All right, Lucian said. Thursday the 14th. She hung up and stood at the window of the apartment she had shared with Damien Voss for 9 years, looking out at the city that was about to crack open, and she allowed herself exactly 45 seconds of something that might have been grief, or might have been relief, or might have been both at once, wrapped around each other so tightly she couldn't have separated them if she'd tried. Then she went to bed and slept without dreaming. The morning of the signing, she dressed without particular attention. A gray wool suit she'd owned for years, modest earrings, no statement of any kind. She had learned long ago that the most effective thing a woman in her position could do was arrive looking like she had nothing to prove. She had ridden to the attorney's office in a separate car from Damien. His attorney had already reviewed everything. Hers had reviewed everything more carefully. The document was clean and complete and fair, and she had made sure of that. She was not going to walk away from her life disadvantaged by sentiment, but she was also not going to fight, not there, not on those terms. When she signed and stood and walked out of that conference room, Helena Voss exhaled slowly through her nose, the sound of a woman who believed she had won something. She had not won anything. She had simply moved a piece into position. The call came to Damien at 4:47 that same afternoon. He was in his office on the 32nd floor of the Voss building, reviewing fourth quarter projections with two of his senior partners, when his assistant appeared at the door with an expression he had never seen on her face before. A kind of controlled alarm, the look of a person delivering news they don't entirely understand but can feel is significant. "There's something on the harbor," she said. "The business channel, all three of them, live." Damien looked up. "What?" "A ship," she said. "A yacht. It docked at the private harbor about 20 minutes ago. They're saying it's—" She paused, as if uncertain how to finish the sentence. "They're saying it belongs to Lucian Moretti." The name landed in the room like a change in atmospheric pressure. One of the senior partners set down his pen. "Moretti," Damien said. "Why is Lucian Moretti at our harbor?" "He's not," his assistant said carefully. "He's not at the Voss harbor. He docked at the Whitmore berth." The Whitmore berth. A private slip on the south end of the harbor that had been dormant for over a decade, maintained by a trust that no one in the city had been able to trace to a living owner. Damien had walked past it more than once. He had never thought to ask why it was still registered. "That berth has been empty for 12 years, Damien said. "Yes, sir," his assistant said. "Until today." He was already reaching for his jacket. By the time Damien's car arrived at the harbor, there were news vans from 4 separate outlets, a line of black SUVs positioned along the seawall, and a crowd that had materialized out of the ordinary Thursday afternoon with the specific energy of people who understood they were watching something historical without being entirely sure why. Lucian Moretti stood on the dock in a dark coat, flanked by 2 men who had the particular stillness of professionals. He was not what people expected when they imagined the name. He was lean, quieter than his reputation, with the kind of face that gave nothing away. He was watching the gangway of the yacht with an expression of focused patience. Damien got out of the car. He crossed the distance with the authority of a man who had built his entire life on the belief that a certain kind of posture could control a room. "Moretti," he said. "What is this?" Lucian looked at him without any adjustment in his expression. "Mr. Voss," he said, "you should probably step back." "I'll need a better reason than that to step back on a harbor my family—" "This is not your family's harbor," Lucian said, with a kind of patience that was more unsettling than anger would have been. "This berth belongs to the Whitmore estate. It always has. I'd suggest you stay where you are and watch." Damien opened his mouth to answer, and then Alara walked off the yacht. She was wearing something he had never seen, not the quiet clothes she had always chosen, the muted colors, the deliberate smallness of how she dressed in their life together. She was wearing a deep ivory coat that moved like it had been made for her specifically, and her hair was back, and she walked down the gangway the way people walk when they have been somewhere a long time and are finally coming home, not rushed, not performing, simply arriving with the full weight of herself. She reached the dock. She looked at Lucian first, who gave her a single nod. Then she looked at Damien. He would think about that look for a long time afterward. What exactly was in it? It wasn't triumph. It wasn't cruelty. It was something closer to clarity, the expression of a woman who had been waiting patiently for the moment when the truth no longer needed her protection. "Elara," he said. The word came out strange in his own mouth, like he was hearing her name for the first time. "Damien," she said, evenly, without heat. "What?" He stopped, looked at Lucian, looked back at her. The news cameras were running. He could feel them. "What is happening?" Elara tilted her head slightly, as if she were giving him the opportunity to arrive at the answer himself. He did not arrive at the answer. "My name," she said finally, "is Elara Whitmore. I am the last surviving heir of the Whitmore family, and this harbor, this birth, and the trust that has administered both for the past 12 years belong to me." She paused. "Let that settle. I think you signed some papers today. So did I." Another pause, shorter. "We're done, Damien. But what comes next? That's just beginning." She turned. Lucian fell into step beside her. The two men who had flanked him closed the distance behind them without a word. The crowd at the seawall had gone absolutely silent. Damien stood on the dock alone as the cameras kept rolling, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. The specific, nauseating vertigo of a man who has just understood all at once the full dimensions of what he has lost, and the full dimensions of his own blindness, and the fact that both of those realizations are arriving simultaneously and too late to be useful. The gray October sky sat above the harbor like a lid. The water moved the way water always moves, indifferent to the people standing beside it. Somewhere on that dock, in the wreckage of everything he thought he knew, Damien Voss began to understand that the quiet woman he had divorced that morning was not the woman he had believed her to be. He just didn't know yet how wrong he had been, or how much it was going to cost him. The news cycle didn't sleep that night. By 9 o'clock, every major business outlet in the city had run the harbor footage at least a dozen times. Elara walking off that yacht, the ivory coat, the way she'd said Damien's name, with the same flat calm a surgeon uses when explaining a diagnosis. Someone had gotten a clean shot of Damien's face in the moment after she turned away, and that image was the one that kept circulating, the one that editorial writers would spend the next week dissecting. He looked, one commentator said, like a man who had just opened a door and found the room on the other side was not the room he expected and was also on fire. By 10, the Voss stock had dropped 4 points in after-hours trading on nothing more than speculation and the particular anxiety markets feel when a name they thought they understood turns out to be attached to something they didn't. By midnight, Damien was still in his office. He had sent everyone else home. His assistant had left a cup of coffee on his desk that had gone cold 2 hours ago, and he sat behind the glass and the city lights and the accumulated evidence of his own success, with the harbor footage playing on his monitor on mute, watching Elara walk off that gangway again and again and again without being able to stop himself. He had called her. Twice. The number he'd had for 10 years went directly to a recording that said the line was no longer in service, delivered in a tone so neutral it felt like an insult. He had called his attorney. His attorney had said, with careful professional distance, that any communication with Ms. Whitmore should now be directed through her legal representation, and that her representation was— He paused here, and Damien heard something shift in the man's voice. Caldwell and Associates. International Division. Caldwell and Associates was not a firm you hired when you wanted a quiet resolution. International Division, Damien repeated. Yes, his attorney said. He hung up. Helena Voss arrived at the Voss building at 7 the following morning without being asked, which was how she operated. She didn't wait for invitations, had never in her life waited for anything she considered hers by right, and she walked off the elevator on the 32nd floor with her coat still on and her reading glasses already pushed up into her silver hair like she'd been awake since 4 and intended for everyone to know it. Damien was still behind his desk. He had not gone home. She took one look at him, the untouched coffee, the monitor, the particular set of his jaw, and she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "This is manageable," she said. "Tell me you knew," Damien said. "I didn't know. Tell me you knew and you let me go through with it anyway." "Damien," her voice was blade flat. "I didn't know who she was. Nobody knew. That was clearly very much her intention. So you pushed me to divorce a woman you hadn't bothered to investigate." Helena's eyes didn't flinch. "I made a judgment, based on everything she presented to us. She presented nothing. That was on her." Damien stood up slowly. He wasn't a man who raised his voice. He'd learned early that quiet authority carried further than volume. But something in the way he rose from that chair made Helena sit very slightly straighter. You told me she was a liability. You told me she was dragging the family's position. You sat across from me at your own dinner table and you said, and I am quoting you precisely, that I had spent a decade married to a woman who contributed nothing and reflected poorly on everything we were building. That was my honest assessment based on nothing, he said. Based on the fact that she didn't perform for you. That she didn't hand you credentials on a silver tray and ask for your approval. He leaned forward, both hands flat on the desk. Alara Whitmore sat inside this family for 10 years, and you never once made any effort to understand who she was. Helena said, with composure she was now visibly working to maintain, neither did you. That landed. They both felt it land. Damien straightened up. He turned to the window. The city below was already moving, already burning through another ordinary morning, indifferent to the particular catastrophe unfolding on the 32nd floor. Get out of my office, he said, not loudly. We need to... Out, Helena. She stood. She smoothed the front of her coat with both hands, which was the only outward sign she gave that the conversation had affected her, and she walked to the door and she stopped. Whatever she's doing, Helena said without turning around, it's calculated. Don't mistake this for emotion. The Whitmore name is not just a name. If she is who they're saying she is, then this city is about to change in ways you're not ready for. She paused. And you need to be on the right side of that, not chasing it from behind. Then she left. Damien stood at the window for a long time after. Alara had not gone home. The apartment she'd shared with Damien had been left exactly as it was. She'd taken 3 bags, her books, the second-hand copper kettle she'd had since before she'd ever heard the name Voss. Everything else she walked away from without looking. She was staying at the Whitmore estate property on the northern edge of the city, a house that had been kept in careful maintenance for 12 years by the same trust that held the harbor berth, and 11 other assets distributed across the city's real estate and financial architecture. The house itself was not dramatic. It was the kind of house that looked like serious money from the outside and serious history from the inside, the kind of place that didn't need to announce itself. Lucian was there when she arrived the previous evening. He had taken the smaller guest wing without being asked. He operated that way, had always operated that way, efficient about space and conscious of what he was and wasn't welcome to occupy. He was at the kitchen table when she came downstairs at 6 in the morning, already dressed, already on his second coffee, reading something on a tablet he turned face down when he heard her on the stairs. Don't hide it, she said. He turned it back over. She glanced at the screen on her way to the coffee maker. Voss Group Financial News, after-hours trading data, a column with a headline she read only the first 4 words of before she'd read enough. She poured her coffee. She sat across from him. He called me twice last night, she said. Lucian said nothing. Line's been discontinued, so it didn't get through. I'm not going to call him back. I know, Lucian said. I'm not saying that for your benefit. I'm saying it because I need to say it to someone and have them not try to talk me out of it or tell me I'll regret it. She wrapped both hands around the mug. I'm not going to regret it. I don't think you are, Lucian said. You don't know that. No, he agreed. But I don't think you spent 11 years making careful decisions and then forgot how to make them. She looked at him across the table. He had the same kind of face he'd had when she first met him, 7 years ago, in the very different circumstances of a backroom meeting in a city neither of them was supposed to be in. He was not a comfortable man to know. He was not soft or easy or the kind of person who made you feel safe in the conventional sense. But he had never lied to her, and that was a rarer quality than most people understood. They're going to move fast, she said. Helena Voss is already in crisis management. Yes. And there are others. She set the mug down. The people who dismantled my family's assets 12 years ago. They thought the Whitmore line was finished. They've had 12 years to build their own structures on top of what they took. She paused. They're going to be more afraid than Damien, and more dangerous. Lucian nodded slowly. I've had my people watching 3 of the primary names since yesterday morning. And? Movement, he said. Phone calls that shouldn't be happening between people who were never supposed to know each other. One of them liquidated a significant holding this morning, panic selling. Good, Alara said. Let them panic. A panicking person makes mistakes. She picked up her coffee again. I need the documents. The Caldwell team has a copy of the acquisition records, but I need the originals. The ones that show what actually happened to my parents' holdings in the 18 months before they died. Lucian was quiet for a moment in the specific way that meant the next thing he said was going to cost him something. Those documents exist, he said. I've had them for 4 years. She looked at him. I was waiting, he said, for the right moment, for you to be in a position where they couldn't be used against you before you were ready. You should have told me, she said carefully. Yes, he said, I should have. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the early morning light was doing what it always did at this hour, thin and provisional, not yet committed. I need them today, she said. I know, he said. You'll have them. The meeting at Voss Group's executive floor happened at 11 that same morning, which was both faster than Damien expected and more crowded. The board had called it, not him, which was itself a data point. Boards only acted unilaterally when they smelled blood in the water, and the smell this morning was coming from multiple directions. There were 9 of them in the conference room. Damien sat at the head because the chair was his, and he was not going to cede the symbolic point, but the room's energy made the question of who was actually leading this meeting ambiguous. 3 of the board members had their tablets out before he'd even closed the door. 2 others were in a side conversation that they didn't stop when he walked in. He waited. Eventually, the conversation stopped. Marcus Webb, who had been on the Voss board for 14 years and had the specific confidence of a man who had survived 3 different versions of this company, leaned forward and put his hands flat on the table. We need to know your exposure, he said. My personal situation, Damien said, is a private matter. Nothing about Alara Whitmore is private anymore, Webb said. That footage has been seen by every serious financial player in the city. The Whitmore name has not been publicly active in over a decade. If she's claiming the estate, if she has the documentation, the trust records, the asset structure, then we are talking about a return to the market of a fortune that was last estimated at, he glanced at the woman beside him. 11 billion at dissolution, she said flatly. Adjusted for the assets that were never actually dissolved, some estimates put the current value considerably higher. The room took that in. That's a different kind of player than any of us have dealt with in 10 years, Webb said. And you were married to her. For 10 years, yes. And you had no idea. Damien's jaw tightened. No. Then either she hid it from you completely, which is a remarkable feat, and suggests a level of strategic intelligence we should all be paying attention to, or, Webb paused, or you didn't look. The room was very still. I need to know, Webb said, whether she has anything that touches this company. Anything from those 10 years of marriage that gives her a claim, an entry point, a reason to come at us. Damien said nothing. Voss, Webb said, with a particular edge now. I'm thinking, Damien said. Don't think, Webb said. No. We need you to know. Damien looked at the table. There was something moving at the back of his mind, something he had not allowed himself to look at directly since the previous evening, a memory from 4 years ago. A set of documents that had crossed his desk during a period when the company was in financial difficulty, serious enough to threaten 2 major acquisitions. A period when he had been told a private investor had come in as a silent partner to stabilize the position. He had asked, at the time, who the investor was. He had been told it was a small trust entity, privately held, and he had not pressed further because the company had needed the capital and the terms were clean, and he hadn't wanted to examine the thing too carefully while he was relieved it was working. He had not pressed. He had not looked. A trust entity. He thought about the harbor berth, maintained for 12 years by a trust that no one had traced to a living owner. Damien, Webb said. I need to make a call, Damien said and stood up. His attorney's office had the investment records within 90 minutes, which was very fast and meant the attorney had already been looking. Damien stood at the window of a small conference room and read the documents once, carefully, and then put them face down on the table and stood there with his hands at his sides. The trust entity that had stabilized Voss Group 4 years ago, providing capital that had allowed the company to survive a near-critical quarter, was called the Halcyon Shore Trust. Halcyon Shore Trust was registered to a private beneficiary. The beneficiary's identity had been held through a series of shell entities in 3 jurisdictions. At the end of that chain, underneath all of it, was a name, E. Whitmore. She had saved his company. She had done it without telling him, without asking for credit, without attaching any strings or conditions. She had moved her own money into the architecture of his business, and then gone home to the apartment they shared and made dinner and asked him how his day was. He sat down heavily in the chair. He sat there for a while without moving. The attorney appeared in the doorway. "There's more," the attorney said. "Tell me." The trust structure that established the investment also included a covenant, a protective clause. The attorney was choosing his words with visible care. If the investment is ever subjected to hostile review, including, in the language of the document, any action by the company or its principals that the trustee determines to be in bad faith, the covenant allows the trust to call the full capital position due. Damien stared at him. "She owns a piece of Voss Group," the attorney said, "a significant piece. And if she decides the divorce constitutes a bad faith action, she can call it," Damien said. "Yes. She can call it, and we'd have to produce capital we don't currently have liquid." "Yes," the attorney said, more quietly. Damien pressed both hands flat on the table in front of him. The wood was cool and solid and didn't care about any of this. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, the specific architecture of the life he had built was quietly showing him its cracks. "She hasn't called it," he said. "Not yet," the attorney confirmed. "She could have called it yesterday. The second those papers were signed, she could have triggered the clause." "Yes." "But she didn't." "No," the attorney said. "She didn't." Damien sat back. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about the painting at the museum, the woman alone at the harbor, the 2 glasses of wine. He thought about 14 hours in a hospital waiting room. He thought about a Tuesday drive to the ocean for no reason except that she'd mentioned she missed the smell of it. He thought about signing those papers without looking at her. "I need to know who brokered the original Whitmore asset dissolution," he said. 12 years ago, when the family's holdings were broken up. I need the names." The attorney went still. "You know something," Damien said. "I know," the attorney said slowly, "that those proceedings touched several firms in this city. And I know that at least one of those firms had a relationship with the Voss family's financial advisors at the time." The air in the room changed. "Say that again," Damien said. "I'm not saying it's connected," the attorney said carefully. "I'm saying the proximity is there and someone should look at it." Damien stood up. The motion was fast, faster than he intended, and the attorney stepped back slightly despite himself. "Who?" Damien said. "Give me the name of the firm." "Damien, the name." The attorney said a name. Damien knew it. He knew it because it was on the letterhead of the firm his mother had been using for private financial consultation for the last 11 years. He stood in that conference room with the documents on the table and the city outside the window, and the weight of a suspicion so large and so specific that it had stopped being a suspicion and had become something else entirely, something that required a different name. And he felt the floor shift beneath him in the way floors shift when the structural thing underneath them has given way. And what you're standing on is no longer the thing you believed you were standing on. Helena had pushed him to divorce Alara. Helena used a firm connected to the dissolution of the Whitmore assets. The same dissolution that had, 12 years ago, erased a family and sent its last heir into deliberate hiding. The question that rose in him then was not quiet or abstract. It was urgent and physical and tasted like something metallic. It sat in his chest and pressed outward. Had his mother known? Not just about who Alara was. Had she been part of what was done to the Whitmore family in the first place? He picked up his phone. His hands were steady in the way hands are sometimes steady when the rest of a person is anything but. When steadiness is the only thing left between a person and complete freefall. He called a number he hadn't used in 2 years, a contact who moved in circles that neither the Voss board nor Helena's advisors knew he had access to. A man who traded in exactly the kind of information that never appeared on any legitimate record. The phone rang 4 times. "I need everything you have," Damien said when the line picked up. "On the Whitmore dissolution. Who ordered it? Who funded it? And who inside the Voss family's financial structure was on the other side of that table 12 years ago?" A silence that lasted exactly long enough. "That's a dangerous question," the voice said. "I know," Damien said. "Get me the answer." He hung up. He stood in the empty conference room. The documents were still on the table, face down, E. Whitmore's name buried underneath them, in the specific quiet of a truth that had been waiting for a long time to be found. Somewhere on the other side of the city, in a house that had been kept in careful maintenance for 12 years, Alara Whitmore was reading the same documents Lucian had kept safe for 4 years. The originals, the ones that showed exactly what had happened to her family's holdings, and exactly whose hands had been on the machinery when the dismantling happened. And the name at the bottom of those documents, the name of the private financial consultation firm that had acted as intermediary in the transactions that ended the Whitmore legacy, was the same name Damien's attorney had just said out loud in a conference room 14 floors above the street. They were both looking at the same thing now, from opposite ends of the same corridor, walking toward each other through the dark. Neither of them knew yet that the corridor had no safe exit. The documents arrived at the Whitmore estate at 2 in the afternoon, delivered by a courier Lucian had used for 7 years, a man who didn't ask questions and whose discretion had been purchased not with money alone, but with the kind of loyalty that comes from being pulled out of a specific kind of trouble once, a long time ago, and never forgetting it. Alara sat at the long table in the study and spread them out in the order Lucian indicated, and she read them the way she read everything, completely, without rushing, without letting her face do anything her mind hadn't already approved. The first 14 pages were what she expected: asset transfer records, shell company registrations, the careful legal-looking paperwork that serious people use when they want a crime to look like a transaction. She had known the broad shape of this for years. The specifics were new, and the specifics were worse than she'd imagined, but they were not surprising. Page 15 was surprising. She stopped. She read it again. She set it flat on the table and pressed her fingertips against the edge of the paper as though the physical contact might change what was printed on it. "Lucian," she said. He was at the other end of the table. He had been watching her read with the patience of a man who had already read the same documents and knew exactly where she would stop. "I know," he said. "This signature," she said. "This is a co-signatory on the dissolution order. This is someone who had to be present, physically present, in the room when my family's assets were formally transferred." She looked up. "This is not a financial advisor. This is not an intermediary. This is a principal." "Yes," Lucian said. "The name on this document," Alara said, and her voice was doing something she rarely allowed it to do. It was working harder than usual, carrying more weight than the words themselves. And underneath the control there was something that sounded like a woman standing at the edge of a very long drop. "Is not Helena Voss." "No," Lucian said. "It's a Voss," she said, "but it's not Helena." The room was very quiet. "The co-signatory on the order that dismantled my family's estate," Alara said, "is Richard Voss." She watched Lucian's face. He didn't look away. "Damien's father," she said, "who died 8 years ago, who everyone in this city mourned as a man of integrity and vision and all the other words people use for powerful men they never actually examined." She pushed the page slightly away from her, a small motion, almost involuntary. "Richard Voss was in the room when they took everything from my family." "Yes," Lucian said, "and you've had this for 4 years." "Yes." "You kept it from me for 4 years because you thought—" She stopped. She pressed her hand flat on the table and looked at the wall and breathed, one careful breath, through her nose. When she looked back at him, her face had settled into something harder than what had been there before. "What did you think exactly? That I couldn't handle it? That it would change what I was doing?" "I thought," Lucian said carefully, "that if you had this information before you were in a position to act on it, it would destroy your ability to maintain the cover you needed. You were still married to Damien. Any move against the Voss family that looked personal rather than strategic would have—" "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Don't explain it to me like it was a clean decision," she said. "You held back evidence of what happened to my parents, and you made that choice alone, and you didn't tell me." She looked at him directly. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter. It matters. We'll deal with it. But right now I need you to tell me everything else you know that I don't. Right now. All of it." Lucian held her gaze. Then he reached into the interior pocket of his coat and placed a second envelope on the table. She looked at it. "That's not the rest of the financial records," she said. "No," he said. She picked it up. She opened it. Inside were 4 pages, handwritten, on paper that had been folded and unfolded enough times that the creases had gone soft. The handwriting was familiar in the way that something you haven't seen in many years can still be immediately recognizable, like a voice. It was her mother's handwriting. She read the first line and stopped breathing for a moment in the specific way a person stops breathing when their body needs to catch up with what their mind has just understood. It was a letter. Undated, but the references inside it placed it clearly in the last weeks before the dissolution. The last weeks before her parents had died in the car accident that the official record described as weather-related, road conditions, tragic, and unavoidable. The letter was addressed to no one. It was the kind of letter a person writes when they are not sure they will have the opportunity to say the thing out loud. Her mother had known something was coming. She had known the dissolution was not going to be the end of it. She had written, in the careful and unsentimental handwriting that Alara had inherited, along with the copper kettle and the way she stood at windows, that she had discovered the Voss family's involvement, not Helena's involvement. Richard's. That Richard Voss had been the one to bring the consortium together, to provide the financial architecture for the takeover, to ensure the legal structure was clean enough to survive scrutiny, and that her mother had been about to go to her own attorneys with the evidence when Alara stopped reading. She put the pages down. She sat perfectly still for about 30 seconds. Then she said, "My parents didn't die in an accident." Lucian said nothing, which was its own answer. Lucian. Her voice was flat now in a way that was different from composed. It was the flatness of something that has gone so far past a breaking point that it has come out the other side into a different kind of territory entirely. "Tell me what you know." "The official record is what it is," he said. "I have never been able to prove anything different. What I have are inconsistencies. The weather reports for that night don't match the conditions described in the accident report. A witness who came forward 2 weeks later and then recanted and moved out of the city within a month, and a payout from an anonymous trust to the lead investigator's private account that I traced through 6 layers before I lost the thread." She looked at him. "I know," he said. "I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking." "You've known for 4 years," she said, "that my parents may have been killed, that the Voss family may have been involved, and you said nothing." "I had no proof," he said. "What I had would have gotten you killed. You were living inside that family. You were sleeping in that house. If you had known and your behavior had changed even slightly." "Stop." She stood up. She walked to the window. The garden below was ordinary and quiet, and utterly indifferent to the fact that the woman standing above it had just had the foundational story of her life rearranged into something unrecognizable. She stood there with her hand on the window frame and her back to Lucian, and she worked through it. Not the grief. That was a different room she was not going to open right now, but the implications, the sequence, the structure of what she now knew versus what she had built her plan around. Her plan had been about restoration, about reclaiming what was taken, about exposing financial crimes and corporate manipulation and walking out the other side with her family's legacy intact. Her plan had not accounted for the possibility that the people she was dealing with had already crossed a line that made corporate exposure insufficient. "Helena," she said without turning around. "Does Helena know about what Richard did?" "I believe so," Lucian said. "I can't prove it, but the way she's moved in the 12 years since Richard died, the way she's positioned the firm's financial relationships, maintained the specific advisors who were involved in the dissolution, it reads like someone managing an ongoing liability, not someone in the dark." She turned around. Her face was a different face than the one she'd been wearing 10 minutes ago. "And Damien?" "I don't think Damien knows anything," Lucian said. "I've watched him for years, Alara. I watched how he operated. I watched how he treated you. The signs of a man concealing guilt are specific, and he didn't have them. What he had was the ordinary blindness of someone who never looked for something because he wasn't afraid of what he might find." "He looked for it yesterday," she said. "He called someone, a contact outside his usual channels. My people picked it up. He's asking questions about the Whitmore dissolution." Lucian's expression shifted slightly. "That's a problem." "Or it isn't," she said. "If he gets to the same information before you're ready, then I need to be ready faster," she said. She came back to the table. She stood over the documents, the financial records and her mother's letter, and the 12 years of careful architecture she had built around herself. And she felt the specific weight of a person who has just understood that the ground beneath their plan has been replaced by something less stable than they thought. Pull the timeline forward. The gala, Whatever date Caldwell suggested, move it. Alara, how long to be ready? We said 3 weeks. How long can we actually do it in? Lucian looked at her for a moment. 10 days, he said. If everything holds. If no one moves against us first. 10 days, she said. Then 10 days. Damien got the call at 6 that evening. The contact he'd reached that morning, a man named Gareth, who had spent 20 years gathering information that other people paid not to have gathered, called from a number that routed through 2 different countries and said, without preamble, I found the thread. You're not going to like where it goes. Tell me, Damien said. He was in his car, parked 3 blocks from the Voss building, because some conversations needed to happen outside the architecture of a place that might have ears. The Whitmore dissolution was orchestrated through a consortium of 5 private investors, Gareth said. I have 4 of the names. The 5th was the primary architect, the one who designed the structure and brought the others in. He's the one who gave it enough legal cover to hold up for 12 years. Give me the name, Damien said. Richard Voss, Gareth said. The car was very quiet. Say that again, Damien said. Your father, Gareth said without inflection, because he was a professional, and professionals didn't soften things that couldn't be softened. Richard Voss was the primary architect of the Whitmore dissolution. He assembled the consortium. He provided the legal framework through a firm called Aldrin Consulting, which your mother has retained continuously since your father's death. Damien's hand tightened on the phone. There's more, Gareth said. Say it. The accident that killed Alara Whitmore's parents, Gareth said. I've been looking at the original investigation for 3 hours. There are problems with the record. Nothing I can take to a court, but enough that I wouldn't call it clean. Damien said nothing. Damien, Gareth said, which was the first time he had used the name. Are you still there? I'm here, Damien said. I need to know if you want me to keep pulling, Gareth said, because the next layer is going to put you in a position where what you know becomes a liability. Once you have this, you can't not have it. Keep pulling, Damien said. He hung up. He sat in the parked car on a street that looked like every other street at 6 in the evening, and he thought about his father, the measured, deliberate man who had taught him that composure was the highest form of intelligence, who had built a company on the principle that reputation, carefully maintained, was worth more than any single transaction, who had shaken hands with city officials and museum boards and charitable foundations with the same steady grip, who had sat in a room and signed his name to a document that took a family's life apart at the seams. He thought about Alara at that museum fundraiser, the way she'd been standing in front of the painting, a woman alone at a harbor, facing out toward the water. He had thought at the time that she seemed like someone who was used to standing in places where she didn't quite belong. He understood now, with a clarity that was almost physical in how much it cost him, that she had never been the person who didn't belong. She had always known exactly where she was and what she was doing there. The one who didn't belong, who had been moving through borrowed space without knowing it, was him. He started the car. He drove to the Whitmore estate without calling ahead, which he understood was either the bravest or the most reckless thing he'd done in years, and pulled up to the front gate at 7:15. There was a security presence he hadn't expected. 2 men, not theatrical about it, just present, with the particular quality of stillness that comes from people who are paid to notice things. One of them approached the car. Damien Voss, Damien said. I need to speak with Alara. The man looked at him for a moment with no particular expression. Wait here, he said, and stepped away. Damien waited. The gate was iron, old, worked into a pattern at the top that might have been waves, or might have been something else. The house beyond it was lit in several windows. He sat in the car and felt the specific discomfort of a person who has driven somewhere without knowing whether they'll be let in, and has too much information in their chest and nowhere to put it. The gate opened. Alara met him in the front room, not the study. A choice, he understood, about what she was and wasn't willing to share with him. The room was high-ceilinged and spare, the furniture serious rather than decorative, the kind of room that had been used for important conversations for a long time and had absorbed some quality of that into its walls. She was standing when he came in, which was also a choice. Lucian was not in the room, but Damien had the clear sense he was close. You drove here yourself, she said. Yes. You didn't call. I wasn't sure you'd answer. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't read the way he'd once thought he could read her. He understood now that what he'd taken for transparency in those 10 years had been selection. She had shown him the things she chose to show, and he had mistaken the absence of deception for the presence of the whole truth. "Say what you came to say," she said. He said it. He said it plainly and in order, the same way he'd been trained to present difficult information. Facts first, implications second, personal response last, if at all. He told her what Gareth had found. He told her his father's name. He told her what Gareth had said about the accident. She listened without moving, without any change in her face that he could identify. When he finished, the room was quiet. "You drove here to tell me that," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you had a right to know that I know," he said. "And because I believe, that what happened to your family may be something my family caused. And if that's true, then whatever you're planning, whatever comes next, I'm not going to stand on the wrong side of it because I was too proud or too afraid to say that out loud." She was looking at him the way she had on the dock, that clear, level, assessing look. "Sit down, Damien," she said. He sat. She sat across from him. She did not lean forward or make the body language of a woman extending an olive branch. She sat straight and looked at him and said, "Your father was in the room." "Yes. I've had that document for about 6 hours. A pause. "Your mother has known since before Richard died. The firm she's retained, Aldrin Consulting, was the legal vehicle for the entire operation. Helena didn't just inherit your father's business interests when he died. She inherited his liabilities, and she's been managing them ever since." Damien absorbed this. "Including pushing you out," he said. "The divorce. That was liability management." "Yes," she said. She didn't know exactly who I was, but she'd become increasingly nervous about the proximity. A decade is a long time to maintain a secret, and the longer it held, the more anxious she became. "Getting you to end the marriage was about removing me from a position where I might eventually find something." She paused. She miscalculated. "She thought you were ordinary," Damien said. "Everyone thought I was ordinary," Elara said, without self-pity. "That was the point." Damien leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands loose in front of him. He looked like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just been given permission to set it down, except that setting it down had not made him lighter. It had just made the weight visible. "I signed those papers," he said. "I stood in that office and I signed without looking at you." "Yes," she said. "I'm sorry," he said. It came out plain and unadorned, and he had the sense that was the only way it was worth saying, that if he'd dressed it up, it would have meant less. Elara was quiet for a moment. "I know you are," she said. "That's not what we're here to talk about." He nodded. "I have 10 days," she said. "The gala, the formal announcement of the Whitmore estate's return, is in 10 days. I'm going to use it to put everything into the public record. Every document, every transaction, every name." She held his eyes. "Including your father's." "Including my father's," he said. "Helena will be there. She'll know what's coming. She'll try to move against it." "Yes," he said. "She will." "I need to know," Elara said, "whether you're going to be a problem." He looked at her. "No," he said. "I'm not going to be a problem." "That's not enough," she said. "I need to know whether you're willing to testify. On record. To what you found. Your contacts' information, your own investigation, your account of how the divorce was orchestrated and by whom." She paused. "I need you to stand in a room and say your mother's name out loud and tell the truth about what she did." The room was very quiet. Damien sat with that for a long moment. He thought about Helena, who had shaped him and pressured him and loved him in the specific conditional way of a woman for whom love and leverage were never entirely separate. He thought about his father, who had been dead for 8 years, and who now occupied a different place in his understanding than any man he'd ever thought he knew. He thought about a painting at a museum, a woman alone at a harbor. "Yes," he said. Before either of them could speak again, Lucian appeared in the doorway. He had a phone in his hand, and his expression was the expression of a man delivering information that cannot wait for a better moment. "We have a problem," he said. Elara looked at him. "What?" "Helena Voss called an emergency meeting of the Voss board 40 minutes ago," Lucian said. "She's moving to restructure the company's legal entity. Specifically, the holding structure that contains the Halcyon Shore Trust position. He paused. If she completes it, the covenant clause becomes legally ambiguous. Your claim on the capital position gets tied up in litigation that could run 3 to 5 years. Alara stood up. She knows, she said. Someone told her, Lucian said. Someone in the last 2 hours. He looked at Damien with an expression that was not accusation, but was very close to it. Damien was already on his feet. I didn't tell her, he said. I haven't spoken to her since this morning. Your attorney, Lucian said. Damien went still. Your attorney, Lucian said again. The one who pulled the investment records. The one who told you the name Aldrin Consulting. He held Damien's gaze. How long has your attorney worked for the Voss family? The answer came to Damien like cold water. 14 years, he said. He was already on retainer to Helena before you took over his contract, Lucian said. Damien's hand went to his phone. He stopped himself. If his attorney had already passed information, calling him now was pointless at best and dangerous at worst. She's going to move everything, Alara said. She was already thinking forward, already past the shock of it, which Damien recognized as a quality he had seen in her before and had simply not understood. If she completes the restructure before the gala, I lose the financial leverage. The documents still exist, the names still exist, but without the capital position I have significantly less pressure on the board and significantly more room for her to frame this as a personal vendetta rather than a legal exposure. She looked at Lucian. Can we block it? The restructure requires board approval, Lucian said. It's an emergency session. If we can get to even 2 board members before the vote. Marcus Webb, Damien said. They both looked at him. Webb has been on that board for 14 years, Damien said. He was never close to my mother. He came in under my father's era, but he's always been about the company, not the family politics. If he understands what Helena is doing, why she's doing it, he won't vote for it. He paused. But he needs to hear it from me, not from a legal filing or a press release, from me, in person, tonight. Alara looked at him with that assessing look again. Then she looked at Lucian. How long do we have? She said. The meeting is at 9, Lucian said. It's 7:40. Go, she said to Damien. He moved toward the door. Damien, she said. He stopped. If you're doing this because you think it fixes what happened between us, she said, it doesn't. That's not what this is. I know, he said. Then go. He went. Alara stood in the center of the room after the front door closed, and Lucian watched her, and neither of them spoke for a moment. You trust him? Lucian said. I trust that he's angry enough at the right people to be useful, she said. That's enough for tonight. She moved back to the table, back to the documents, and she pulled page 15 toward her again, her father's signature, Richard Voss's co-signature, the clean official typography of a legal crime. And she looked at it for the last time with the eyes of a woman who was still trying to reconcile it with the man she'd lived beside for a decade. Then she turned the page over. I need the Caldwell team here by 8, she said. We're moving the gala. To when? Lucian said. 7 days, she said. And I need everything on Helena. Everything. Not just what she managed, what she knew, what she authorized. She looked up. I want to walk into that gala with the complete record. Not enough to wound her, enough to end it. Lucian nodded. He reached for his phone. From somewhere deeper in the house, a clock struck the quarter hour, and the sound of it moved through the old rooms like something patient and unhurried, measuring out the distance between what had been done to this family and the accounting that was now, after 12 years, finally beginning to come due. Alara didn't sleep that night. She stayed in the study until well past midnight, working through the Caldwell team's materials as they arrived in batches. Secured file transfers, encrypted and layered, each packet requiring a separate authorization code that she entered herself rather than delegating. Lucian had offered twice to take over the verification process. She had declined twice without explanation, because the explanation was something she wasn't going to say out loud, that she needed to read every page herself, needed to be the one whose eyes passed over each line, because this was her family's story and she was not going to receive it secondhand. The Caldwell team had been thorough in ways that impressed even her. 12 years of financial movement traced through 7 jurisdictions. The shell companies that had absorbed the Whitmore assets, some dissolved, some still active under different names, their ownership obscured through enough legal distance to survive casual scrutiny, but not the kind of scrutiny that came with full resources and genuine motivation. The money had moved and changed shape and moved again, but money always left a trail if you had the patience and the access to follow it, and the Caldwell team had both. At 11:47, a new file arrived. She opened it. It was a communication record. Internal emails from Aldrin Consulting, recovered through a source the Caldwell team declined to name in the document itself, but whose reliability they vouched for with the kind of institutional confidence that meant someone had gone to considerable personal risk to obtain them. She read through them in order. Most were what she expected: operational communications, logistics of the dissolution, the dry transactional language of people conducting serious business with the specific flatness that comes from not wanting anything emotional in the record. Then she found the one dated 3 weeks before her parents died. It was from Richard Voss to the senior partner at Aldrin. It was 4 sentences. The language was careful and indirect in the way that careful and indirect language sometimes becomes its own kind of confession, because the indirection itself tells you the writer knew that what they were discussing was something that could not be named directly. The 4th sentence said, "The situation with Whitmore has become untenable. We discussed contingencies. I trust you understand that I am referring to the permanent kind." She read it 3 times. Then she set down the tablet and sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the wall. Permanent kind. Her mother's name. Miriam M. Whitmore. In a sentence about contingencies of the permanent kind, written 3 weeks before a car accident on a road where the weather conditions didn't match the official report. She had known, in the abstract, since Lucian told her. Knowing in the abstract and reading the sentence were different experiences occupying different parts of the body, and she sat in the study and let the difference move through her without trying to manage it, because managing it at this stage would have been a form of dishonesty she couldn't afford. Her mother had known something was coming, had written a letter to nobody, in careful handwriting, folding it enough times that the creases went soft, had been 3 weeks from whatever she'd planned to do next, had not gotten there. Ilara sat with that for 6 minutes by the clock on the wall. She allowed herself exactly those 6 minutes. Then she picked up the tablet and forwarded the email to the Caldwell team's lead attorney with a single instruction. This goes in the primary evidentiary package. Highest priority. I want a legal opinion on criminal exposure by morning. She moved to the next file. Marcus Webb had listened to Damien for 40 minutes without interrupting, which was not his usual mode of operation, but which the situation seemed to demand. They sat in Webb's home office, not a corporate space, a real room with books that had been actually read and a desk that had papers on it, and Damien laid it out, all of it. His father's name on the dissolution order, Helena's use of Aldrin Consulting, his attorney's betrayal, the covenant clause and Helena's emergency restructure move. When Damien finished, Webb sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Richard," he said. "Yes," Damien said. "I worked with your father for 11 years, Webb said. He said it without effect, just a statement of fact, the way a man speaks when he's adjusting something large and internal. I liked him. I thought I knew him." "So did I," Damien said. Webb looked at him. "And Helena's moving tonight to restructure the holding entity. Yes, the meeting is at 9. You're on the board." "I'm aware I'm on the board," Webb said dryly. He picked up his phone, looked at the time, set it back down. "She'll have votes. She's had 14 years to build relationships on that board. She knows who needs what." "She doesn't have yours," Damien said. "Not if you understand what she's actually doing." "What she's actually doing," Webb said, "is protecting herself from a criminal exposure that could end with her in a courtroom." He paused. "Which means she's afraid. Which means the evidence against her is real." He looked at Damien steadily. "You're certain about what you found?" "I'm certain," Damien said. Webb was quiet for a long moment. "If I vote against this restructure," he said, "and then the Whitmore case goes public and Helena goes down with it, the company survives. But it survives as something that was built on the proceeds of a crime. The board is going to have to reckon with that. The shareholders are going to have to reckon with it." He paused. "Are you ready to reckon with it?" "I don't have a choice," Damien said. "Everyone has a choice," Webb said. "You're choosing. I'm asking if you're ready for what the choice costs." Damien looked at the books on the shelves of Webb's office, the actual read kind, the kind with broken spines and pages that had been turned in real hands. He thought about a painting in a museum. He thought about 45 minutes on a Tuesday, driving toward the smell of the ocean. He thought about a woman who had saved his company with her own money and gone home and said nothing. "I'm ready," he said. Webb nodded slowly. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Helena," he said when the line connected. "I've been informed about the emergency session." A pause. "I won't be attending, and I won't be available for a proxy vote." Another pause, shorter. "Because I've had a more informative evening than you planned for me to have." He listened for a moment. Whatever Helena said, it didn't change his expression. "Good night, Helena," he said, and ended the call. He set the phone down. "Without my vote, she doesn't have the majority," he said. "The restructure fails tonight." He looked at Damien. "She'll try again. Different structure, different mechanism. She has lawyers who are very creative under pressure." 7 days, Damien said. That's how long we have." 7 days, Webb repeated. He stood, extended his hand. Damien took it. "For what it's worth," Webb said, "I don't think you knew. About your father, about any of it." He held the handshake for a moment. "But that's not going to matter to some people." "I know," Damien said. "Own it anyway," Webb said. "That's the only way through." "What?" Helena Voss received the news that the board session had failed at 9:43, alone in her study, delivered by her attorney in the careful tone of a man reporting a defeat to someone he feared. She said nothing for a moment after he finished. Then she said, "Who got to Webb?" "We believe it was Damien," her attorney said. The silence that followed was not the silence of a woman who was surprised. It was the silence of a woman recalculating, moving pieces, assessing the new configuration with the same cold precision she had applied to every crisis in her 71 years. "Damien has the investment records," she said. "Almost certainly," her attorney said. "And he's spoken to Alara Whitmore." "It appears so." She stood. She walked to the window of her study, the same window she had stood at 1,000 times, in a house that had been the center of her universe for 4 decades, looking out at a garden that she had designed and maintained and controlled to the last detail. The night was dark, and the garden was dark, and the window gave back her own reflection. "My son," she said, in a voice that could have meant many things, "has decided to be noble." Her attorney said nothing. "Find out what she's planning," Helena said. "The gala, whatever form it takes. I need the date, the venue, the guest list, and the precise nature of the evidentiary package she intends to present." She turned from the window. "And I need it before she's ready." "And if we can't stop the presentation?" her attorney said. Helena looked at him with an expression he had seen before and hoped each time not to see again. "Then we change what the presentation reveals," she said. "Every document can be recontextualized. Every record can be met with a counter-record. She thinks she has 12 years of evidence. I have 12 years of preparation." She paused. "I did not build this family's position by losing the last move. I built it by making sure there was always another move." Her attorney nodded and left. Helena stood alone in her study. She looked at the portrait of Richard on the wall, the formal one, commissioned the year before he died, the composed face of a man who had understood that appearances were the primary architecture of a life well lived. "You should have been more careful," she said to it. The portrait said nothing. She sat at her desk and began to write. At 2 a.m, Alara's phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't recognize routed through an anonymizing relay. 3 sentences. She knows about the gala. She has a source inside Caldwell. She's building a counter-narrative. Alara read it twice. Then she set the phone face down and pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the documents spread out before her. The financial records, the dissolution orders, her mother's letter, the email with the 4 sentences and the word permanent in the final one. A source inside Caldwell, which meant the evidentiary package was compromised, which meant Helena knew the shape of what was coming and had 7 days to build a wall around it. Alara sat in the study of her family's house, in the particular quiet of 2 a.m, and she felt the full weight of what was arrayed against her. The money, the lawyers, the decades of careful relationship building, the specific ruthlessness of a woman who had survived worse than this and had never once lost because she was always willing to do the thing the other person wasn't. She thought about who she had been for 10 years. The quiet wife. The woman who chose smallness as strategy, invisibility as armor. The woman who had been patient and careful and precise. She thought about her mother, who had been 3 weeks from doing something and had not gotten there. She picked up her phone and called Lucian. He answered on the second ring. "There's a source inside Caldwell," she said. A pause. "How certain?" "Certain enough," she said. "I need you to pull the package, all of it. Move it to a clean team. No one with any prior Voss contact, no one Helena's lawyers have ever been in the same room with." "That's a 48-hour process minimum," Lucian said. "Then start now," she said. "And Lucian." She looked at her mother's letter, the soft creases, the careful handwriting. "I need you to find the witness, the one who came forward after the accident and then recanted and left the city. 12 years is a long time, but people don't disappear, they just go somewhere else." "I'll start in the morning," he said. "Start now," she said. She hung up. She sat in the quiet house, in the study that had waited 12 years for her to come back to it. And she made a decision that she had been circling for weeks without allowing herself to land on it fully. She was done being careful. Careful had kept her safe. Careful had kept her hidden. Careful had given her the time to build the architecture of what was coming. But careful was no longer what this required, because the woman on the other side of this had spent 71 years being careful, and careful was her native terrain, and on that terrain Alara would always be fighting at a disadvantage. What Helena Voss had never prepared for, what she had dismissed as a quality the quiet wife lacked entirely, was ruthlessness. She was about to discover her mistake. The next 6 days moved the way days move when everything inside them matters. Fast on the surface, grinding underneath, each hour carrying the specific weight of something that cannot be undone if it goes wrong. Alara rebuilt the evidentiary package from scratch. The Caldwell team's compromised unit was quietly sidelined, not fired, not confronted, because confronting them would have told Helena exactly how much Alara knew about the breach, and that was information she intended to keep. Instead, she pulled a secondary team, people who had never been in the same room as any Voss attorney, people whose connection to the Whitmore estate existed only through Lucian's private network, and she moved every document, every communication record, every financial trace into a new secured architecture that had no overlap with the old one. She slept 4 hours a night, sometimes 3. She ate when Lucian put food in front of her and drank coffee that she let go cold and reheated twice before finishing. She had the particular focus of a person operating past the point where the body volunteers its cooperation, drawing instead on something older and less reasonable than physical energy. On the third day, Lucian found the witness. His name was Paul Arden. He had been 26 years old when the accident happened, a night shift employee at a gas station 2 miles from the site, driving home at the relevant hour on the relevant road. He had come forward 2 weeks after the crash and told an investigator that he had seen another vehicle, a large dark sedan, in the vicinity of the Whitmore car approximately 4 minutes before emergency services received the first call. He had described the sedan's position as unusual. He had used the word deliberate. 6 weeks later, he had recanted. He had told the same investigator that he had been confused, that the road conditions had impaired his judgment, that he was sorry for wasting anyone's time. 1 month after that, he had relocated from the city to a small town 4 hours north, where he had lived quietly for 12 years under a slightly adjusted version of his last name. Lucian found him in 41 hours. Alara drove up herself. She didn't bring anyone with her. She drove 4 hours north on a gray morning that smelled like coming rain, and she pulled up to a house that was modest and well-maintained, with a truck in the driveway and a garden that someone tended with attention. Paul Arden answered the door himself. He was 38 now, heavier than the photograph in the original report, with the eyes of a person who had been waiting for a specific knock for a long time and had never entirely stopped expecting it. He looked at her. "You're her daughter," he said. "Yes," she said. He stepped back from the door and let her in without being asked. They sat at his kitchen table for 2 hours. He talked. Alara listened the way she always listened, completely, without filling silences, without steering. She let him go at his own pace through what he'd seen that night, what had happened after he came forward, the phone calls he'd received, the visit from 2 men who had not identified themselves but whose message had been plain enough that he hadn't needed the words spelled out. The money that had appeared in his account 3 days later. the understanding that the money was not a reward but a contract, and that the terms of the contract were silence and distance and the permanent retirement of what he had seen. "I was 26, he said. He was looking at the table rather than at her. "I had a kid on the way. I was scared." "I know," Elara said. "I've thought about it every day since," he said. "What I should have done." "I know that too," she said. "I'm not here to make you feel worse about it. I'm here to ask if you're willing to do it now." He looked up. "Testify." "On record. Your account, the coercion, the payment, the men who visited, all of it." He was quiet for a long moment. 12 years ago, they scared me into silence," he said. "Those people, are they still—" "The people who came to you were hired through Aldrin Consulting," she said. "The senior partner at Aldrin died 4 years ago. The firm is being dissolved as part of this proceeding. The men they sent, I have their names, and I have their financial connection to the coercion payment." She paused. "You are not at risk. I can protect you. But I need you to decide." He looked at her for a long moment, at the steadiness of her face, the particular quality of her stillness, and she watched something in him shift, slowly, like a door that has been closed for a very long time, finally finding its hinge. "All right," he said. "All right." She drove back through the rain that had arrived by early afternoon, and she called the Caldwell lead attorney from the car, and she said, "We have the witness," and the attorney said, "That's everything," and she said, "I know," and hung up and drove the rest of the way in silence. On the 5th day, Helena moved again. She filed a preemptive legal challenge through a firm nobody had expected her to use, a corporate litigation group out of a different city entirely, brought in quietly and positioned in a jurisdiction that created procedural complications for the evidentiary package without blocking it outright. It was elegant in the way Helena's moves were always elegant. It didn't stop anything. It created friction, delay, the kind of legal weather that made clear presentations muddy. Damien found out about it through Webb, who had been monitoring the Voss board's communications with the specific vigilance of a man who had decided which side of something he was on and intended to be useful about it. Damien called Elara. She answered on the second ring, which surprised him slightly. "She filed in Harmon jurisdiction," he said. "The challenge targets the chain of custody on the financial records from the dissolution. She's going to argue the documents were obtained improperly." "I know," Elara said. "We were expecting something in that direction." "The timing is designed to create a problem at the gala," he said. "If the challenge is active when you present, her attorneys will be in the room and they'll interrupt with the filing the moment you introduce the documents. It'll look like a disputed record rather than a confirmed one." "I know," she said again. "Do you have a way around it?" A brief pause. "I have a way through it," she said. "Which is different." He waited. "The challenge targets the financial records," she said. "She's assuming that's the center of the presentation. She's preparing to fight the documents." She paused. "The documents are not the center. The witness is. And the witness is not in any filing she's made." Damien was quiet for a moment. "She doesn't know about Arden." "No," Elara said. "She doesn't." Another pause, longer. "Elara," he said, "I need to be in that room." "You will be," she said, "as a witness. You'll give your own account, your investigation, your contact's findings, the conversation with your attorney. You'll be on record." "I meant—" He stopped. "I meant I need to be there as more than a witness." The line was quiet. "I know what you meant," she said. "Get some sleep, Damien." She hung up. The gala was held at the Whitmore family's historic venue on the east side of the city, a building that had been part of the estate's holdings, leased to a private events company for 11 years and quietly reclaimed through the trust's legal team in the week following the harbor announcement. The events company had not argued. Certain things, when the documentation is complete and the legal position is unambiguous, do not invite argument. The room was full by 7:30. It was not a social event in the conventional sense, though it was presented as one. Invitations had gone out 10 days prior, framed as a formal announcement of the Whitmore estate's restoration. The guest list was specific and deliberate. Board members from 6 major companies, 3 city officials, 2 federal financial regulators who had been quietly briefed in advance, senior journalists from the 2 most credible business publications in the region, and the attorneys from Caldwell who were not compromised, Also invited, the Voss board, all 9 members. Marcus Webb had confirmed attendance. The other 8 had sent responses ranging from cautious acceptance to studied neutrality to one who had declined on the grounds of a prior engagement that everyone present understood was not a prior engagement. Helena Voss had been invited. Her response had been acceptance, delivered through her assistant in language so formally neutral it had its own kind of aggression. She arrived at 7:45, which was 5 minutes before Alara, which was not an accident. She wore black in the manner of a woman who understood that black at a formal event could mean mourning or power depending entirely on how you carried it. She carried it as power. She moved through the room, greeting people with the unhurried ease of someone who had attended 1,000 events like this one and never once felt out of place. Alara watched her arrive on a monitor in the anteroom where she was doing final preparation with Lucian and the Caldwell lead attorney. "She looks comfortable," the attorney said. "She's supposed to look comfortable," Alara said. "She thinks she knows what's coming." She was looking at Helena on the monitor. The smooth movement through the room, the hand on an arm here, the brief low word there, the specific social machinery of a woman working a room she intended to own. And she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in the 6 days of preparation. Something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but occupied the same territory as both. She thought about the email. 4 sentences. The word permanent. "Let's go," she said. The room settled when Alara walked in. Not dramatically, not with any theatrical pause. She simply entered, and the room's attention moved toward her the way attention moves toward something it doesn't have a pre-existing category for. The ivory coat was gone. She was in dark silk, precise and unfussy, and she moved through the space without performing anything, which was itself a kind of performance that could not be replicated by people who had to think about it. She and Helena made eye contact across the room within 30 seconds of her entering. Helena's face did not change. She lifted her chin slightly, the minimal acknowledgement of a woman recognizing a threat and declining to show that she recognized it. Alara held the eye contact for 2 seconds, then looked away. She moved to the front of the room. The Caldwell attorney took a position to her left. Lucian was near the back, visible to her, invisible to most of the room. Damien was seated at a table to the right side, near Webb, and when her eyes passed over him, he sat slightly straighter. She waited for the room to quiet fully. It took less than a minute. 12 years ago, she said, without preamble, without introduction, because she had learned from watching Helena that the people who command rooms are the ones who begin in the middle of the thing rather than at its edge. My family's financial holdings were systematically dismantled through a series of coordinated transactions that were structured to appear legal and were not. The room was absolutely still. The Whitmore estate, its properties, its investments, its operating companies, was transferred through a consortium of private investors using a legal vehicle called Aldrin Consulting. The documentation of those transactions has been in the possession of my legal team for the past 7 days and has been filed this afternoon with the relevant federal regulatory bodies. She paused. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say the transactions were not legal. I don't mean they were improperly structured. I mean they were conducted on the basis of fraudulent representations about the estate's financial position, using information that was obtained through a breach of fiduciary duty by parties who had a legal obligation of confidentiality to my family. She let that settle. The primary architect of the consortium was Richard Voss. The sound that moved through the room was not loud. It was the particular sound of a large number of people absorbing a significant thing simultaneously, a collective recalibration, a shift in the quality of the air. Helena Voss did not move. Her face did not change. She was looking at Alara with the expression of a woman who had prepared for this specific sentence and had decided in advance that she would not give it the satisfaction of a visible reaction. Richard Voss is deceased, Alara continued. His liability in this matter is a matter of historical record. What is not historical, what is current and ongoing, is the management of that liability by the individuals who have continued to benefit from and protect the structures he built. She paused. I'm referring specifically to Helena Voss, who has retained Aldrin Consulting continuously from the time of my family's dissolution until the firm's closure last year, and who has used that relationship to actively suppress evidence of what was done. Helena moved then. A small motion. She turned her head toward her attorney, who was seated 2 tables away. A signal. Her attorney stood. "We have a filed challenge," he said, with the practiced authority of a man who had interrupted rooms before, "to the chain of custody on the documents being referenced. Those records are legally disputed and cannot be presented as confirmed evidence in any proceeding." "The financial records are disputed," Alara said. "Yes, I'm aware of the filing." She nodded to the Caldwell attorney, who opened a folder. "Which is why the financial records are not the primary evidence I'm presenting tonight." Helena's attorney stopped. "I'd like to introduce Paul Arden," Alara said. A door at the side of the room opened. Paul Arden walked in. He was wearing a suit that looked like something he had purchased for the occasion and was not entirely comfortable in, and he walked with the particular bearing of a person doing something they have been afraid to do for a very long time and have decided to do anyway. He sat at this chair that had been prepared for him at the front of the room. Helena looked at him. Something changed in her face. Not much, not enough for most people in the room to catch, but Alara was watching for it. A small tightening around the eyes. The specific recognition of a person seeing a variable they believed they had permanently removed from the equation walk back into the room. "Mr. Arden was a witness to the circumstances surrounding the accident that killed my parents 12 years ago," Alara said. "He came forward at the time. He was subsequently coerced into recanting his testimony through direct intimidation and a financial payment that has been traced to an account connected to Aldrin Consulting." She looked at the room. "Mr. Arden has prepared a full written and recorded statement, which has also been filed with the federal authorities this afternoon. He is here tonight to confirm that statement in person." Helena's attorney was already on his feet again. "This is highly irregular." "Sit down," said one of the federal regulators quietly. It was the first thing he had said all evening. The attorney sat. Paul Arden looked out at the room. His hands on the table in front of him were not entirely steady, but he didn't try to hide that. He looked at the people in front of him with the eyes of a man who has carried something for 12 years and is putting it down. "My name is Paul Arden," he said. "On the night of November 14th, 12 years ago, I was driving home on the Hartwell Road at approximately 11:20 p.m. I saw a dark sedan positioned on the road shoulder approximately 40 meters ahead of a vehicle I later identified from news photographs as belonging to the Whitmore family." The room had stopped breathing. "The sedan was not parked," Arden said. "It was positioned. There's a difference. The angle was deliberate. It was partially across the lane. The Whitmore vehicle took evasive action to avoid it. That action caused the car to lose control on the curve." He paused. "The sedan drove away. I did not get the full plate, but I got a partial. I gave that partial to the investigator. It was not included in the official report." Helena Voss was looking at a point on the far wall now. Not at Arden. Not at Alara. At nothing, with the focused attention of a woman applying every remaining resource she possessed to the project of remaining composed. Alara watched her. Then Damien stood up. He hadn't been scheduled to speak yet. Alara saw Lucian shift slightly in the back of the room. A small adjustment, controlled. Not concern exactly, but attention. She gave Lucian the smallest nod. Damien stood with his hands at his sides and looked at the room and then looked at his mother. "My name is Damien Voss," he said. "I am the current CEO of Voss Group and the son of Richard Voss." He paused. "I want to state for the record, for every person in this room and for every record being made of this evening, that I have reviewed the documentation connecting my father to the Whitmore dissolution, and I believe that documentation to be accurate and complete." He paused again. "I also want to state that 5 days ago, my personal attorney, a man retained by my family for 14 years, passed confidential information about this proceeding to Helena Voss. I have filed a complaint with the relevant bar authority this morning. The details of that communication are part of the evidentiary record." He turned his head and looked directly at Helena. She looked back at him. "I'm sorry," he said to her. And the room understood he was not apologizing for what he was doing. He was apologizing for the thing that had been done by people who shared his name and for the years it had taken him to see it. "I'm sorry it took this long." Helena's composure held. It held the way things hold when the structure underneath them is no longer intact, the surface maintaining its shape while the foundation gives way. She stood. The room tightened. "I would like to speak," she said. Her voice was exactly what it always was, controlled, unhurried, carrying the weight of a woman who had never once in 71 years ceded a room she intended to own. Elara looked at her. "Go ahead, Helena." It was the first time she had used the name without the honorific, and everyone in the room registered it. Helena looked at her son, then at Paul Arden, then at Elara. She took her time with each the way a person takes time when they are deciding which version of themselves to bring to the final move. "You have built a very thorough case," Helena said to Elara. "I expected nothing less. You are your mother's daughter." She paused. Miriam Whitmore was also thorough. She was also patient. She was also, in the end, in possession of documents that she believed gave her an unassailable position. Another pause. "I want you to consider carefully whether you have made the same assumption she made." The room was very still. "Because Miriam," Helena said, "believed that having the evidence was enough. She believed that the law, properly invoked, would do what law is supposed to do." Her voice didn't change pitch. It didn't acquire heat. It stayed exactly as it was, which was worse than heat would have been. "She was wrong about that. I want to make sure you are not making the same mistake." Elara held Helena's gaze across the length of the room. She felt her own heartbeat, not racing, not panicked, but present in her chest, in the specific way a heartbeat is present when a person is very alert. "Are you threatening me?" Elara said. "I'm advising you," Helena said. "There is a difference." "There isn't," Elara said. "Not in this room. Not tonight." One of the federal regulators was already on his phone. Helena saw it. Her eyes moved to him, then back to Elara, and in that fraction of a second something happened in Helena Voss's face that Elara had never seen there before, and suspected very few people ever had. A crack, small and fast, there and gone, the specific expression of a person who has run a calculation and arrived at a result they had not prepared for. "You recorded that," Damien said. He was looking at his mother with his hands still at his sides and his voice very flat. "You just said that on record, in a room full of witnesses and regulators. And you did it because you've spent so long being the only person in every room who was truly prepared that you forgot to account for the possibility that someone else might be more prepared than you." Helena looked at her son. He looked back. The room waited. And Helena Voss, for the first time in 71 years, had nothing left to say. Her attorney touched her arm. She looked at his hand on her arm the way a person looks at something they don't recognize. And then she sat down, and the motion of it, the sitting down, the slow lowering, the way her hands folded in her lap with the particular precision of a woman maintaining the last form of control available to her, was the most human thing Elara had ever seen her do. The federal regulator ended his call. He looked at his colleague. Some communication passed between them without words. Elara turned back to the room. Her voice was steady and clear and carried the full length of the space without effort. "The complete evidentiary package, financial records, communication records, witness statement, and the internal email from Richard Voss to the senior partner of Aldrin Consulting dated 3 weeks before my parents' deaths has been filed as of 4 o'clock this afternoon." She paused. "This is not an accusation. It is a record. The authorities will do with it what the law requires." She looked at the room, the board members, the journalists, the regulators, Webb, Damien, Paul Arden, with his unsteady hands. "The Whitmore estate is restored. What was taken has been documented. What was done has been named." She paused one last time. "That's all I came here to do." She stepped back from the front of the room. Lucian was at her side within 10 seconds, which was not theatrical. He had simply moved from the back of the room with the efficiency of a man for whom proximity to a specific person at a specific moment was a professional responsibility. He took seriously. "It's done," he said quietly. "It's not done," she said. Her voice was low for him alone. "The regulators will move tonight. Helena's attorneys will file injunctions before morning. The next 72 hours are going to be the hardest part." "I know," he said. "I need you to stay," she said. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Across the room, Damien was watching her. She met his eyes briefly. A moment of acknowledgement, not warmth, but not coldness either. The specific look of two people who have been through something together that neither of them chose, and that has changed both of them in ways they haven't finished understanding yet. Then she looked away. Behind her, she heard the sound of chairs moving, of voices beginning to rise, of the specific energized chaos of a room in which something irreversible has just happened. And somewhere in that noise, under all of it, she heard Helena Voss say her attorney's name in a voice that was still controlled, and was also, for the first time, afraid. The regulators moved before midnight. 2 federal agents arrived at Helena Voss's residence at 11:43 with a preservation order covering all financial records, communications, and digital assets associated with Helena Voss personally, and the Voss Group's private holding entities. They were polite about it in the way that people with legal authority are sometimes polite, efficiently, without warmth, in the manner of people who have done this before and understand that courtesy and consequence are not mutually exclusive. Helena's attorney met them at the door. He reviewed the order for 4 minutes, which was exactly how long it took him to understand that there was no procedural argument that would work tonight. He stepped aside. The agents came in. Helena was in her study. She did not come out. She sat behind her desk in the room where Richard's portrait hung, and where she had built and managed and protected the architecture of her family's position for 4 decades. And she listened to the sounds of people moving through her house with legal authority, and she did not move from her chair. Her personal attorney, not the one who had been retained through Voss Group, not the one who had passed information to her about Ilara's case, but the one she had kept privately for 30 years, an old man named Hargrove, who had been her counsel in matters she trusted to no one else, arrived at 12:15. She had called him from the gala, in the car on the way home, before she had said a single word to anyone else. He sat across from her and she told him everything. Not the managed version, not the version she had assembled over decades for different audiences with different levels of access. Everything. The consortium. Richard's role, her role in managing the aftermath. What she had known about Miriam Whitmore's intentions. What she had known about the night of November 14th. Hargrove listened without expression for a long time. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Did you order it?" he said. Not an accusation, a question that needed to be answered before anything else could happen. Helena looked at him across the desk. "Richard made the decision," she said. "I was told after." "But you knew before the investigation closed." "Yes." "And you managed the witness." A pause. "I authorized the payment. I didn't know the specifics of the approach until after." Hargrove folded his hands on his knee. He was 74 years old and had the face of a man who had heard many things and been surprised by very few of them, but something in his expression tonight was different from his usual professional composure. It was the look of a person hearing something they had hoped, at some level, not to hear. "Helena," he said, "I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as your attorney and not as someone who has known you for 30 years. She looked at him. "There is no version of what you've just told me," he said, "that does not end in a criminal proceeding. The financial fraud alone is manageable. Richard is dead. The statute of limitations on several of those counts has run, and your direct involvement is sufficiently indirect that a competent defense has room to work." He paused. "The witness, the payment, the interference with the official investigation into 2 people's deaths." He stopped. "That is not manageable in the same way." Helena was quiet. "I can help you," he said. "I will help you. But I need you to be honest with me about every detail, and I need you to understand that the best outcome available to you at this point is significantly different from the outcome you would have chosen." She looked at the portrait of Richard on the wall. She looked at it for a long time. "He was certain it was the only way," she said. Not a defense. More like a woman trying to remember how a thing had made sense once that made no sense to her now. Miriam was going to the attorney. She had the documents that showed what the consortium had done. Richard said if she filed, it would unravel everything, the company, everything we'd built. "I know," Hargrove said gently. "I told him there had to be another way." She stopped. Her hands were in her lap, folded, the same composed posture she had maintained through the gala, through the ride home, through the agents in her house. "He said there wasn't." "And you believed him?" A very long pause. "I didn't stop him," she said, which was not the same as yes, and was not the same as no, and was, Ilara would have recognized, the most honest thing Helena Voss had said in 12 years. The news broke at 6 in the morning. Not a leak. Ilara had made the decision the previous night to release the full statement to the 2 journalists who had been in the room, on record, embargo lifted at 6. She wanted the story in credible hands from the beginning, not fragmented through speculation and rumor. She wanted the first version of it to be accurate, because accurate was harder to dismantle than sensational. She was at this kitchen table of the Whitmore estate when it broke, coffee in hand, phone face up, watching the notification come through. She read the first 3 paragraphs. They were accurate. She set the phone down. Lucian came in from the back of the house. He had been on calls since 4 in the morning, his own network, people positioned in various places who needed to understand what had happened and what it meant for a range of arrangements that existed outside the public record. He looked at her. "It's running." "Yes," she said. "Helena's attorneys filed 2 injunctions overnight," he said. "Both were rejected this morning. The judge cited the federal preservation order and the evidentiary filing." "And Aldrin?" "The remaining partners surrendered their records to the federal authorities at 7 this morning," he said. "Voluntarily. Someone there understood that the first person to cooperate gets a different conversation than the last." She nodded. She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "Paul Arden?" "His statement is fully entered. He's been moved to a secure location as a precaution. My people have him." "Keep him there until the federal investigators have spoken with him formally," she said. "After that, he goes home. He goes back to his life. Nobody touches him." "Understood," Lucian said. He sat down across from her. Not speaking, not presenting anything, just sitting, which was something she had come to understand about him over 7 years. That he knew when presence was the thing and noise was not. They sat that way for a while in the early morning quiet of the house. "She admitted it," Elara said eventually. "Not a question." Lucian nodded. Her attorney made a controlled statement to the federal investigators at 2 this morning. "I have the broad outline from a contact." He paused. "She's cooperating, partially, enough to shape the narrative around Richard's primary culpability and her role as secondary." "She knew about Paul Arden," Elara said. "Yes." "She authorized the payment." "Yes." Elara looked at the table. She thought about the email, the word permanent. She thought about her mother at a kitchen table in another life, writing a letter in careful handwriting to no one, folding it until the creases went soft. "Is it enough?" she said. "For criminal charges." "The federal attorney thinks so," Lucian said. "The interference with the investigation and the witness coercion are the strongest counts. The financial fraud is more complicated because of Richard's death and the time elapsed. But the pattern of concealment that Helena maintained gives prosecutors room to work." She nodded slowly. "It won't be fast," Lucian said. "A proceeding like this takes years. There will be attorneys and delays and appeals and "I know," she said. "I know how it works. I'm not expecting fast." She looked up at him. "I'm expecting true. That's all I ever wanted. The true version on the record. What happens after that is what the law does. It's not mine to control." Lucian looked at her with an expression she could read, the particular look of a person who has watched someone he respects carry an enormous weight for a very long time and is witnessing the moment of setting it down. Damien called at 8. She answered. She had decided she would answer. "It's everywhere," he said. His voice was rough, the way voices are rough after a night with no sleep. "Yes," she said. "The board is calling an emergency session at 10. Webb is going to move for a formal review of the company's financial history and an independent audit going back 15 years. He paused. "I'm going to support it." "Good," she said. "The company might not survive it," he said. "The audit, what it finds, the liability, the association with what my father did. There are institutional investors who are already pulling out." "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to—" He stopped, started again. "I'm not calling for anything, Elara. I'm not going to ask you for anything. I just wanted you to know that what's happening to the company, whatever the audit finds, I'm not going to hide from it. I'm going to stand in front of it." She listened to the quality of his voice, the steadiness in it, which was not the performed steadiness she'd heard from him in the years when steadiness was part of his positioning. This was different. This was the steadiness of someone who has lost most of what they were holding and has discovered that their hands still work. "That's the right thing," she said. "I know it's too late for it to matter in the way it should," he said. "It matters," she said. "Not to us, but it matters." A pause. The painting, he said, at the museum, the night we met. She hadn't expected that. She was quiet. I went back to see it, he said. A few years ago. I don't know why. I just went. He paused. I stood in front of it for a while. I thought about that night. Another pause, shorter. I think I understood even then that you were someone I didn't have the right vocabulary for. That there was something about you I couldn't name because I'd never needed to name something like it before. She looked at the kitchen window. The morning light was doing what morning light does, thin and new, not committed to anything yet. You should have looked, she said, not harshly. When you signed the papers, you should have looked at me. I know, he said. Not for my sake, she said, for yours. Because you were ending 10 years of your life and you couldn't look at it. That's not about me, Damien. That's about what you were afraid to see. He was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. Take care of yourself, she said. What comes next for you is going to be hard. Yes, he said. It's survivable, she said. That's all I can tell you. It's survivable. She heard him breathe. Thank you, he said, for what it's worth. It's worth something, she said. Not everything, but something. She ended the call. She set the phone on the table. She looked at her hands around the coffee mug, her grandmother's handwriting that she'd inherited, the copper kettle on the counter that she'd carried through 10 years of a borrowed life, the kitchen that was finally the kitchen she was supposed to be in. 3 weeks later, Helena Voss was formally charged. 4 counts: criminal conspiracy and the fraudulent dissolution of the Whitmore estate assets, obstruction of justice in connection with the official investigation into the deaths of Michael and Miriam Whitmore, witness tampering in the coercion of Paul Arden, and accessory after the fact in connection with the events of November 14th. The charges were the result of 3 weeks of federal investigation, 14 hours of recorded interviews with Helena's own attorney, and the full evidentiary package that the Caldwell team had rebuilt from scratch and delivered without a single compromised document. Helena entered a not guilty plea through her attorney. She did not appear in court herself that day, which was a choice her legal team had made and which the press read 17 different ways. Elara did not attend the proceeding. She watched the summary on the news that evening, seated in the study of the Whitmore estate, and she watched the court building on the screen and the reporters outside it and the crawl of text at the bottom summarizing what had happened, and she felt something she had not anticipated, not satisfaction, which she had expected and which would have been understandable and was not quite what arrived. What arrived was something quieter, a loosening. Like a cord that had been wrapped around something internal for 12 years had been cut. Not dramatically, just cut. And the thing it had been holding was now simply free to be whatever it was. She turned the television off. She sat in the quiet study for a while. Then she picked up her phone and called a number she had been carrying in her memory since she was 19 years old. A number that had not changed in 20 years because the person on the other end was of the generation that did not change numbers and waited. Her grandmother's housekeeper answered. "Who is this?" "It's Elara," she said. "Tell her I'm coming home for a few days. Tell her I'll be there by Thursday." A sound on the line. The housekeeper setting down whatever she was holding, the background noise of an old house that had been waiting. Then, faintly, a voice from another room. "Old." "Sure." "Tell her to bring the kettle," her grandmother said. Elara smiled. It was the first smile in, she didn't know how long. It felt like a muscle remembering something. "Tell her I will," she said. "What?" The Voss Group audit took 8 months. It found what it found, liabilities connected to the Whitmore dissolution that had been absorbed into the company's financial architecture at various points, some knowingly, some as inherited structures that the current management had never examined closely enough to understand. Damien cooperated fully. He sat for 40 hours of formal interviews. He released documents that his attorneys advised him not to release, on the grounds that voluntary disclosure was the only version of this that let him look at himself afterward. The company was restructured. 2 subsidiaries were sold. 3 board members resigned. Webb stayed. A new independent director was brought in with a mandate for financial transparency that had never existed in the company's previous incarnation. It survived, changed, diminished in specific ways, but structurally intact and, for the first time in its history, built on something that could hold weight. Damien ran it alone through those months with the particular focus of a person who has had everything they thought they were stripped away and has discovered that what's underneath is capable of more than the surface suggested. He was harder to read than he used to be, quieter, less interested in the performance of authority and more interested in the thing itself. Webb told him once, over coffee in his office, that he seemed like a different person. "I'm the same person," Damien said. "I just know it now." Webb looked at him for a moment. "That's better than it sounds," he said. Lucian's ship left the harbor on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the charges were filed. Alara drove to the harbor herself. She parked and walked to the Whitmore berth, the same berth where everything had begun 7 weeks ago that felt like a different decade. And she stood on the dock while the crew completed the final departure preparations. Lucian was on the dock when she arrived. He had his coat on, his hands in his pockets, looking at the water the way he always looked at water, with the ease of a person for whom it was a natural element rather than a backdrop. He looked at her when she approached. "You're not going to try to talk me out of leaving," he said. "Not a question." "No," she said. "Good," he said, "because I'd have to say no." They stood together on the dock. The morning was clear and cold, the harbor moving in long, slow swells, the city behind them already building toward its ordinary noise. "I'm angry with you," she said. "Still, about the 4 years." "I know," he said. "I understand why you did it," she said. "That's not the same as being all right with it." "No," he agreed. "It isn't. If you keep things from me again, I won't," he said. Simple, direct, the way he said the things he meant. She looked at him. 7 years of an alliance built in rooms that didn't officially exist, in the margin between her hidden life and the one she was building toward. He was not an easy man to know. He was not the kind of person who arrived in your life and made it simpler. What he was, and what she had known since the first time they sat across from each other and established the terms of what they were to each other, was a person who did not lie, who did not waver, who could be trusted with the full weight of the truth, because he had never once pretended that weight wasn't there. That was not a small thing. She had lived long enough to know it was not a small thing. "Where are you going?" she said. "East," he said. "There are things to close out. The remaining elements of the consortium that haven't been addressed by the federal case. It's going to take a while." "Be careful," she said. He looked at her sideways. "You've never told me that before." "I know," she said. He looked at her for a moment with that careful, unhurried attention that had never changed in 7 years. "You'll call," he said, "when you're ready." "I'll call," she said. He nodded once. He moved toward the gangway, and then he stopped and turned back. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said. She felt it land, not painfully, which she expected, but cleanly, like something that had been true for a long time and was only now being said in the right room. "I know," she said, quietly. He went up the gangway. The crew began the final cast-off. She stood on the dock and watched the ship's lines come free, watched the hull move slowly away from the berth, with the unhurried certainty of something that knows its own weight and trusts the water. She stayed until the ship had cleared the harbor mouth. Then she turned and walked back up the dock. The city was full in front of her, loud and different, producing its ordinary morning out of 10,000 simultaneous ordinary lives. She walked through it the way she had learned to walk through everything, deliberately, without performing anything, carrying herself at her full height, which was something it had taken her a long time to stop treating as impolite. The Whitmore estate's legal restoration was complete. The trust had been dissolved into direct personal ownership. The properties and assets and the 12 years of accumulated value sat under her name, clean and documented, in a legal structure that could not be challenged by anyone who tried. She had a meeting that afternoon with an architect who had been retained to renovate 3 of the estate's secondary properties for a foundation she was establishing, a nonprofit that would provide legal and financial resources to families navigating the kind of institutional fraud that had swallowed her own family whole. It was not a dramatic plan. It was not a monument. It was the specific, practical answer to the specific, practical damage she had spent 12 years watching go unaddressed. Her grandmother had told her once, at a kitchen table with a copper kettle on the stove, that the best use of surviving something is to make the surviving useful. She had been 13 when her grandmother said it and had not entirely known what it meant. She knew now. She got in her car. She sat for a moment before starting it, both hands on the wheel, looking out at the harbor where the ship had been. The water was already closing over the space where it had moved. That was what water did. It did not hold the shape of what had passed through it. She started the car. She thought about her mother's letter, the soft creases, the careful handwriting, the sentences that had been written for no one and had reached her anyway, 12 years later, across every distance that death and deliberate cruelty can create between a mother and a daughter. She had read it so many times in the past weeks that she knew it completely, could have written it out from memory in her grandmother's kitchen if she'd wanted to. She hadn't wanted to. Some things you carry inside you without writing them down again. They become part of the structure rather than a document of it. She drove out of the harbor lot and into the city's morning traffic and moved through it with the ease of a woman who knows where she is going, which was not a dramatic thing and was not a small one. 6 months later, the foundation opened. She stood at the front of the room, a different room, a working room, with folding chairs and a table that had papers on it, and 4 staff members who had been recruited with the specific criteria of having survived something and become useful about it. And she looked at the people who had come to the opening and thought about what it had taken to be standing in this particular room on this particular morning, and she did not say any of that out loud. She said, "Here is what we do, and here is how we do it, and here is who we do it for." And then they began. Helena Voss's trial commenced 14 months after the charges were filed. It ran for 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Alara did not attend. She followed the coverage through Hargrove's updates, because Hargrove, in the particular way of an old attorney who had found himself on the wrong side of history and was trying to be useful in the time remaining, had offered to keep her informed, and she had accepted, because information was always better than the alternative. The verdict came on a Tuesday afternoon. 3 of the 4 counts were sustained. Helena was acquitted on the accessory charge. The jury found the connection between her authorization of the payment and the specific events of November 14th could not be established beyond reasonable doubt, which was the most honest outcome the evidence could support, and also the one that would take Alara the longest to make peace with. She sat with that for a while. She thought about what was possible within the law and what the law could not do, and the distinction between the two, which was not a distinction that resolved cleanly into anything satisfying but was real nonetheless. She thought about her father, who had understood the law and believed in it, and had been killed before he could use it. She thought about her mother, who had been 3 weeks from something and had not gotten there. She was here. She had gotten there. She went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on, the copper one, second-hand, with the small dent in the side that had been there since before she could remember. She made tea and sat at the table and looked at the window and the light coming through it. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in the life of a woman who had spent 12 years fighting to get back to ordinary Tuesdays, and she sat in it and let it be what it was, which was enough.